right, good evening. My name is Wes Seiler, and I am the host of the Berking Conservative. And tonight I am thrilled. I have the pleasure of being joined by a third party candidate for President of the United States. Brian Carroll spent 44 years of his life as an educator, mostly teaching history to 7th and 8th graders. He spent 9 years abroad in Colombia teaching children of missionaries. He's an evangelical Christian and passionately supports whole life politics, which we're going to talk about tonight, with respect to the dignity of all human life from conception to natural death. And now he is running for President of the United States and as the leader of the American Solidarity Party. So, Brian, welcome to the program, sir. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, so, I'm familiar with what you've been doing. I've been following over the past few weeks, but I know a lot of our followers probably aren't. We spend a lot of our time talking about Republicans and Democrats and the VP debate and the Supreme Court nominations and all the things that dominate the news cycle. So can you just kind of introduce our followers to you first, sir, and then the party that you're representing?
Well, yeah, and we are kind of a new thing. It's not surprising that people haven't heard of us. We've been around about 11 years, or 9 years, I guess. We started in 2011. And I joined 4 years ago, never expecting to be the candidate this time. My own background, I taught school starting in California, out in rural Central California, where a lot of the families were migrant farm workers. Then I left and went to South America and was teaching there 9 years on a mission center, Wycliffe Bible Translators. We evacuated that because of the Civil War, came back to California, and I bounced around a couple different teaching jobs, not really finding what I was looking for, and then wound up back in the exact same position that I had left 25 years earlier, and finished my last 11 years there. I am married 47 years. My wife and I have 5 adult kids and 14 grandkids. They are scattered all around the world, and so both for that reason and other reasons, I have traveled a great deal. In addition to the time I lived in Colombia, I've spent a fair amount of time traveling around in Brazil, some in China, some in, quite a bit in Europe, several trips to Europe, and most recently quite a bit of time in England because I have a son living there.
Yeah. So what kind of motivated you to get into politics now? I mean, you've had all this experience teaching, traveling, doing these amazing things, and you talked about your family. So why this turn into this dangerous, messy, dirty world of politics?
Well, it kind of surprised me too. I was ready to go ahead and teach into my 70s. I was enjoying it. And in 2016, I left. I had been a Republican for 35 years, gradually easing my way out of it as I objected to what seemed like just a general stinginess in the Ryan McConnell era, and feeling like I needed some room to grow into other areas and examine some other things. I had uh, I'd eased myself out of the Republican Party, and when Trump came along, that was just a bridge too far. I couldn't handle that, but neither could I be a Democrat. So I started looking around and found the American Solidarity Party, and I read through the platform once, and that's all it took. I was convinced. Jumped in with both feet. I ran for Congress in 2018, and by the time I had finished that race, which I lost. But I realized that I had made myself a fairly likely candidate for president in 2020, and I had a full year, a little bit more than a year,
Yeah.
to pray about that, and the doors just kept opening, and prayerfully I kept walking through them. So here I am.
So let's talk about that platform that you mentioned that kind of captivated you. So I guess my first question is, can you break down the word solidarity for someone who may not be familiar with that term? And then two, what does that mean in relation to the platform of the party that you represent as well?
Yeah, a lot of people hear the word solidarity and figure it's communist or something, and they forget that in Poland it was Lech Wales's Solidarity Party that brought down communism. They were very union, they were Catholic, and they challenged the government, and it collapsed. So solidarity goes back to uh, the idea that we're all in this together. You know, uh, we watch out for each other. We don't let people fall through the cracks. Um, there's, you know, if you go into the United States history, we have Woody Guthrie, you know, singing "Solidarity Forever," which was a Union song,
Yeah.
and so there is a tradition in the United States of solidarity, and it's also very strongly in uh, some Catholic writing. I didn't know anything about the Catholic social teaching until I joined the party and kept seeing this vocabulary and said, "Well, what's that word mean?" And so I had to do some research
Yeah.
and do some catching up. But solidarity and um, sphere sovereignty, subsidiarity, uh, all of those things, the vocabulary largely comes out of Catholic social teaching.
Hmm. So how does that trickle down to the practicalities, right? Because so much of politics is dominated by where do you stand on this issue and where do you stand on that issue, whether it's gun control or abortion. You know, when you talk about these bigger concepts, these this deep meaning behind these words, how does that trickle down for you to a specific platform that someone could say put you up against another candidate and say, oh, this is where he stands on this, that, or the other.
Well, we kind of defy all of the algorithms. Um, the crazy thing is, when I did the I side with quiz, they labeled me as a democratic socialist, and then the just this last week in the American Conservative, uh, Rod Dreher endorsed us. So we may be the only democratic socialist that's ever been endorsed in the American Conservative magazine.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we are. We're hard to peg, uh, but we are absolutely uh, pro-life for the whole life, consistent life, whole life. A lot of different terms for it, but the idea is from the moment of conception until the moment of natural death, we respect and want to allow all the dignity possible to every human life, and and that also means social justice. And I think this goes along with, Burke was a social justice worker. We think of him as a conservative,
Yeah.
but he was a social justice warrior. He fought against slavery. He fought against the uh, misuse of royal power in India
Absolutely.
and in the United States and the American colonies. So it is, we think of social justice warriors as being, somewhere on the left, but that's not true. You can be a conservative and battle for social justice.
Right. Same thing with
Uh,
the environment,
we,
right? As I know that's a big part of your platform as well. And I've always argued that conservatives should be leading the fight for a responsible taking care of the environment, of respecting nature and trying to, especially Christians, trying to take what God has given us and to use it well. It doesn't mean shutting down all businesses or completely transforming industries, but it does mean being responsible, right, with the environment and not excessively polluting it or subjugating everything to industry, right? So there's definitely areas where you kind of break out of that very strict mold that so many people want to put us in today.
I think that the way I define social justice is that those of us who have voice and privilege need to be using that voice and that privilege to help those who don't have it. And of course, the number one group of people in the United States that don't have voice are the unborn. So that's a social justice issue. But so is all of our racial inequities. So is the fact that when we talk about climate change and environment, the inner cities are the first to suffer from that. We have large areas of the city that are minority neighborhoods that, if you go in and do the average temperature in those neighborhoods is, 8 or 10 degrees higher than the neighborhoods nearby that are more affluent.
Yeah.
Uh, so those are social justice issues that we all ought to be involved in.
Yeah. And talking about race as well, because I just love the way that you talked about those aspects of Edmund Burke that very few people, I think, are aware of, in which he did. He was fighting the good fight, working with Adam Smith and praised him for, much of his theories about capitalism. And then at the same time, he was, like you said, fighting against the East India Trading Company and Warren Hastings and all this. And I think the way that translates today is so many times I feel like conservatives find ourselves in having to be playing down or denying any aspects of racism that exist. And of course, the liberals want to emphasize them, and we're in this back and forth where you're either racist or you're not. It's very clear this person is and this person is not. And Brian, I just don't think of it that way. I think of my life and traveling overseas, much like you, and it's for me racism is this horrible word, but what's the opposite of that is an appreciation for other people that are different, and we can all grow in that respect. There's so many things that I have to learn from someone who has a different cultural, ethnic background, and I would never presume to be able to stand in their shoes and know what it feels like, and yet it feels like as a conservative, I can't say that. Otherwise, I'm a liberal. Otherwise, I'm a liberal. If I say maybe not a huge portion of the country is racist, but we all have some things that we can do to broaden our racial understanding. It seems like there's almost no space for that except, in the party that you're talking about and the platform that you're talking about. And I just love to see more of that. So I think it's a fantastic thing that you're bringing up.
It's normal Christian or normal human behavior to be tribalistic.
Yeah.
We always, everywhere you look in history, when different tribal groups bumped up against each other, there's almost always warfare. And so when you look and say, well, where does that not happen? The number one place it doesn't happen is if you read through the Gospels, Jesus is always reaching out across ethnic lines. And, he goes to a woman at the well, she's a foreigner. The Good Samaritan is a foreigner. He's constantly showing his disciples that they are not to think in terms of ethnic tribals groups. He wants to break that.
Yeah, I mean, there's this notion at the end of the Bible where every tribe and tongue will come, which means that we still have tribes and tongues. So that's still a part of who we are, and yet it all kind of submits to God in the end, kind of a reverse of Babel. And at the end, as we all find, as you were talking about solidarity, we find this common, love for God in the end. And what that means for a conservative Christian is that it's okay to appreciate that about someone else. It's okay to be able to want to learn about their culture and appreciate it. And something we've talked about too is that different groups hold their culture in different levels of regard. There's all these studies that show that people who come from an African American standpoint, vast majority hold their culture and their ethnic heritage very close to their heart. And some people, from different backgrounds may not do so quite as much. They may not even know. Oh, I had no idea whether I was Irish or German or French or whatnot. It's just different for different people, depending on how they've immigrated, how long, what connections they have. And so it's okay for there to be differences. I love that. But as we talk about this, as we talk about, Jesus and his message, we talk about the Bible, Catholic social teaching, I wonder in the American Solidarity Party, is there a place for people who don't hold to those convictions. We have so many people on our channel who are either agnostic or atheist, different religions, and they may not relate. Is that something that would be excluded from the movement that you're building, or could it be part of it?
Well, anybody's welcome in our party, and we do. Uh, in our last summer when we had our annual convention, and it was delegates, and one of the delegates elected from Arizona was a Muslim. So we're not limited to just uh, Christians or just Catholics, or there's different groups uh, within the party that are representing a lot of different religious groups, Orthodox and others. Uh, I think because we focus, one of our focuses is we believe in protecting religious freedom, and so we are going to be more attractive to people who value religious freedom, whether it's their own or for others. And so there are certain groups that want to devalue religion in national life, and they would not be as drawn to us as others might be.
Mm.
Uh, but we're certainly open to anybody uh, who is pro-life, who supports social justice, who believes in the value of communities and families. We support an economic pattern called distributism, which is another word that nobody understands. And we can come
Yep.
back to that. And, we are in favor of protecting our climate, and we are in favor of pursuing peace. So anybody who supports those, 7 things could be attracted to our party.
Yeah, let's talk briefly about distributism because I think that goes back to Chesterton, right? Is some of the origins of that thought, and as I understand it, it's this notion of focusing on what's local, focusing on what's organic as opposed to what's corporate. I think about where I live in Northwest Florida, and there's so many local businesses around here, mom and pop type restaurants and shops, and it's just very important to the people here because it brings out that culture, and we all just love it. And I think if I understand it, the thought is trying to protect those type of businesses as opposed to them getting run over by giants. But I would suppose that the common critique against that is economic efficiency and the lowest price possible, and some of these corporate entities can come in and they can sell at a much lower price, distribute much quicker. And so when people talk about distributism, essentially what people may take that is less economic growth, at the expense of corporations in order to protect the local ones. Why would that sacrifice be worthwhile? What is it about local businesses for you that makes it so important to be part of your platform?
I saw a definition yesterday. I don't remember
Mm.
who it came from, but somebody said socialism is where the government owns the means of production. Capitalism is where a few rich guys own the means of production. And distributism is when lots of people own the means of production. So it's capitalism on steroids.
Yeah.
And we want as many people as possible to have some ownership in their own work, in the product of their labor. And when we turn people into pieces of the wheel, cogs in the wheel, we take away the pride in their work. We take away in them being able to support themselves from their own labor. And we have lots of things that actually fit a distributist mold. Think of savings and loans instead of banks, or co-ops. Um, uh, think of there was a case up in Oregon a couple of years ago. A guy who had built a big business as a flour mill wanted to retire, and so he turned it into a co-op and sold the company to the workers.
Mhm.
If he had not done that, some big international company would have come in and bought him out and probably laid off a lot of those workers.
Mhm.
Our our economic system, where we are uh, bigger and better and more efficient, cheats us sometimes because we don't see the inefficiencies until much later. I just read a thing today in the Strong Towns magazine or website talking about the fact that when Walmart builds a new store, they build into it a life expectancy of the building of 20 years. But the town, in order to get that, has offered uh, tax reductions on their land. They've put in, all kinds of structures, streets, parking lot, help with the parking lot, light, uh, street lights, all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff that is intended to last for 100 years. So the town has put all of that investment, and then you have a great big empty building. And I have driven by several of those myself, where it used to be a Walmart, and Walmart closed. And but when the Walmart came in, a bunch of local mom and pop stores died,
Right.
and now you've got a town that has no Walmart, but it also does not have all of the mom and pop stores that were there before the Walmart came in.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe it's efficient. Maybe you get some sales tax. Maybe you get something in the short term, but long term, it's a bad investment. And we need to be investing in such a way that we have uh, jobs, good jobs, and the mom and pop stores tend to do that better than the big guys.
Mm.
Uh, and we want where owners get to work their own property and produce uh, for the health of the society and the health of their families.
Yeah, I mean, I think about balance and how important that was to the American founders. Is it wasn't like that we had this ideology of this is exactly how to do perfect government, right? It was rather these competing loyalties between the local level, the state level, the federal level, and it seems for so many years America has been trending towards this nationalism to the point that most people they know who Trump is, they know who Biden is, they may know who their senator or congressman is, but if you ask them who's your mayor, who's your city councilman, oh, I have no idea. That's in-depth stuff, man. Right? Because so much of the focus is at that level, is at the national level. We listen to national level media. We may or may not pick up a local newspaper. And so I love the notion of revitalizing some of that, revitalizing states' rights, local rights, being able to balance that, being able to balance the corporate infrastructure that is just everywhere with a little bit more empowerment to the local. So I think that's a very beautiful thing. But one of the other questions I wanted to ask on your platform is we talked about the importance of social teaching. You're talking about there can be a place for people of different religions and different belief system. I want to ask you kind of squarely, what are your views on the separation of church and state? If you're bringing together this platform, you reference your belief system. At what point do you say that you're imposing your belief system on someone else? I'm specifically thinking about someone from the LGBTQ community. Is they may say, listen, that's great, that you believe and you have a wonderful family, and you're a Christian evangelical and heterosexual, but what about someone else who doesn't believe that type of lifestyle, the evangelical Christian lifestyle, is for them, who doesn't believe in traditional marriage, who believes that something else is better for them? Why should someone like that support your party?
In a pluralistic society, and we are, but in a pluralistic society, there will always be tensions between the different groups that make up the pluralistic society. That's just a given, and there is always going to be uh, parts of the different sides are going to be tugging, and there's a constant tug of war. Um, And so we have to learn to respect each other in the midst of our differences. And I think, we, because of Obergefell, we now have uh, legalized uh, marriage uh, outside of what has traditionally been the religious view of marriage.
Hmm.
I don't think we're ever going to go back on that. I don't think that it's possible retroactively to tell somebody that, when the government said you were married and now you're not married, that's the government can't do that. The government cannot back up and change that. Um, but we also have to make sure that religious groups are still free to teach the scriptures, whether it's the Quran or the Bible or anything else. That the religious groups have the freedom to teach those documents according to what they believe they mean.
Right.
And the effort now, I think, is to uh, try and label some of that as hate speech. And that's where we have to draw the line.
Yeah.
Uh, we have to say, all right, in a pluralistic society, the church may not believe in the validity of this particular kind of marriage, but we're going to recognize those marriages as a society. But the church still needs to have permission to teach what they believe is in their scriptures.
Yeah. One of the things that Burke has helped me with is kind of getting away from abstractions, and the notion of talking about entire communities, in using a single phrase or word alone. And when I think about that, I mean, I think about so many of my friends and coworkers, who identify as gay, and how easily it has been to get along with almost every one of them, if not all of them, right? Like when we do this on a relational, practical level, on a local level, as you were talking about with distributism, we start to understand or appreciate a person, even if we disagree, with them. And again, that goes back to the Christianity that I follow was, Jesus, like as you were talking about, he was, expansive in his ministry with all kinds of different ethnicities and taught his disciples to do that. And even if he disagrees with the behavior that this woman has or the way Zacchaeus has run his his taxation and things like that. And I think that that's the first step is being able to encourage people to reach across the aisle to meet people who are different than you, and instead of interrupting them every couple of minutes, not letting them speak, right, as we've seen with Trump, of actually being able to listen and respect each other's differences. So I love that in what you're running for. Let's talk with the few minutes that we have left. Let's talk about the notion of a third party candidate, and this is what I wanted to ask you is. With you running as a third party as opposed to in the Democratic or Republican parties, um, you hit on it a little bit, but do you see a lack of diversity within those parties? That's kind of my first question. Then I'll have a couple follow-ups after that.
Anytime that you have a party that has gone on for a long time
Hmm.
and it had been taken over by uh, different stakeholders within the party, and they tend to shut down any new thinking. And so creative thinking tends to come from third parties. If you look at somebody like Biden, I don't know if Trump listens to focus groups as much as Biden does, um, but Biden probably gets a daily report. This is what our focus groups have come up with, and so this is what you should be saying today. And I don't have any focus groups. I don't have anybody telling me what to say, and I don't have to worry that if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to suddenly lose the election. Chances are pretty poor that I'm going to win the election. So I don't have that much to lose. I can say what I'm thinking, and so can the other third party candidates. There's actually of the parties that are actually getting people on the ballot in various places. There's probably, I don't know, might be 20 different parties that have their name on the Colorado ballot. And and so there's a lot of different parties out there. And those are the ones that are doing the creative thinking. And we can win uh, without being elected to office. We can win if people steal our platform.
Yeah.
You know, we are not interested in the glory of me becoming president, but we have a bunch of ideas that we think our country would be a whole lot healthier if we adopted those policies. And so if one of the major parties wants to steal all or part of our platform, more power to them. We donate it, um, and parties tend to be thinking very much short-term victories. You know, both the Republicans and the Democrats are completely focused on November the 3rd and January the 20th, and they will make any kind of sacrifices for that short-term victory. Third parties are looking for uh, delayed gratification. You know, we're looking for a better world later, but it's not going to be in January.
Yeah.
We're looking for improvements that can be enjoyed by the next generation. So we're thinking long term,
Yeah.
where the
Yeah.
other parties have to think short term.
When you describe it that way, it makes me think of kind of the early stages of a presidential campaign, which starts with the primaries. And in my mind, there is diversity of thought there. I mean, you look at Andrew Yang, talking about universal basic income, Bernie Sanders talking about outright socialism on the Republican side. When Trump was first running, you had Rand Paul on stage, you had Ted Cruz, and then, of course, Trump himself shifting the debate to a point of political incorrectness was really how he started. And talking about immigration, and building the wall and all these things that were very different than, say, during the Bush years. And so there's this interesting diversity of thought and all these arguments, but then it feels like very quickly that window closes. And then it's our guy, here we go. And it turns into a wrestling match or, a football game where you're just cheering on your team no matter what. And when I see the third parties come in, it's trying to keep, the way you describe it seems like you're trying to keep that debate going. You're trying to keep that thinking going as opposed to it shutting down. And, to me, I could see that as a really a fundamental shift. What if we kept that, conversation going throughout the process up until the end, as opposed to where we are, where I think so many people are voting out of a sense of obligation and fear, and they just don't want the other guy to win. And yet here you are talking about all these ideas that you want to be at the forefront. I think that's that's an amazing thing, and I hope that more people pay attention to it. What I've seen from some of your followers is the notion of guilt-free voting, of actually being able to vote for someone without having to feel any sense of regret. And I know you've been asked this question before, but in terms of really the pro-life cause, do you see a danger in, say, someone like me in Florida, where it's very, very close? If you were to have significant traction, in the next few weeks, or let's say the next election, do you see yourself as stealing votes away from the Trump campaign to the point that Biden could make gains, and then all of a sudden you've got a very pro-abortion president, and maybe people feel some regret about that? So for someone who does vote for you, like at the expense of the Republican ticket, do you see any danger in that? What would you say to that person?
Well, from where I sit, I see people who otherwise would vote Democratic and they're voting for me, and I see people who would otherwise vote Republican and they're voting for me, and maybe in equal numbers. Uh, and then we're seeing a lot of people who are saying, I stopped voting 10 years ago because I just gave up on the system, but I'm going to vote for you. So we're bringing people back into the system that wouldn't have been voting at all. So you can't accuse us of stealing those votes.
Yeah.
And if the votes we're taking from Republicans and Democrats kind of balance each other out, and I think they do, we are not really throwing the election there either. And of course, that's only in the very few states where there's actually a contest. In California, If you vote for me instead of voting for Trump, it means that Trump will, instead of losing by 4.5 million votes, he will lose by 4.5 million plus one vote. That kind of
Yeah.
thing, or the other way around. If you vote for me instead of Biden, uh, he's only going to win by 4.5 million, or give or take a one. So, in most states, that's the case.
Yeah.
In Florida, it's going to be close. In Wisconsin, it's going to be close. There's a few states that are going to be close, and in those states, it really comes down to the fact that we're taking probably fairly equal numbers from both sides.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to what you said about the innovation. There were some innovative things that were said, but there were also some lines that candidates could not cross. For example, uh, Tulsi had been uh, on record with some fairly pro-life uh, statements. Biden had been pro-Hyde Amendment.
Yeah.
Uh, but the word went out that the Democrats this year were aiming for that narrow 20% of their own party
Yeah.
that support any abortion, anytime, for any reason. And if they deviated from that, they were going to get clobbered. And so Biden moderated, Tulsi moderated. I think even Amy Klobuchar had said some statements that she kind of moderated from. And so there were simply some rules that you could not violate.
Right.
And they primaried Dan Lipinski because he was pro-life. He had, 20 years in Congress, and they said you can't be a Democrat anymore. They did the same thing in Tennessee with John DeBerry,
Yeah.
state legislature. Uh, there were certain lines where they simply said you cannot cross this line and still be a Democrat.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're talking about, and again, it goes back to actual relationships and allowing people to fully articulate their beliefs. We have so many liberals and Democrats that are regulars on our programs, and having done this for a couple years now, when we start to talk about things like late term abortion, I mean, even some of those far left people will kind of recognize that, yeah, that's a little bit dangerous, that's a little bit too, it doesn't really make me comfortable. Talk about early stages of pregnancy. That's when they kind of stand strong on the issue. But we get into there's this room for compromise. Partial birth, abortion, things like that, and so many other issues. And I think the same thing for conservatives as well. Is very few conservatives are going to go to the absolute extreme on many issues. But that conversation just it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen once the parties have to arm up and go to war against each other, which is what I think we're living in. But at the same time, as these parties pull away, I think they appeal to less and less people, and there's this room in the middle that I think Americans are searching for, of decent, honest, compassionate conversation, of a nuance that's there, as opposed to hate. And Brian, I see you as leading that. So thank you so much for being on the program, for kind of articulating the platform, kind of an introduction to it for us. Really enjoy talking to you, and hope to talk to you again, sir.
Thank you, Wes. You can invite me back anytime,
Love it.
even after the election.
All right, sounds great. Thank you, sir. Have a good night.
Thank you.